Hello everyone, welcome to Caroline Nutrition. This is episode 7, Cooking with Oil. I'm your host Ian Cath, and I'm the one with the interest and questions to help us have the best that food has to give, health, vitality and enjoyment. And to help us make some sense of all the information that's out there, I'm joined with Caroline Scott, nutritionalist and dietitian, and the person with the answers to your questions. Hello Caroline, how are you today?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Ian. Good.
Today we're going to be talking about oil. This was a topic I wanted to talk about because it is one thing, because I do love my cooking, that I get terribly confused about, and I do like to eat well and healthily, but I have often been very confused with the best oils and fats to cook with. I've very much bought into some things that I believe now are incorrect, and I would love to discuss them in detail. And do you reckon you can help us?
Oh, definitely. This is a topic that comes up time and again, and it's something I've covered previously. And also, one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation today was we actually had a request from a client and a listener to a previous podcast where he was asking about canola oil. So we decided that it was about time that we actually hauled out this subject again and had a good old look at oil and fat in your kitchen.
Now, we're not going to be going down the path of using oils without heating them up, using them cold. We're going to be talking about cooking primarily here, aren't we?
Well, we are, but we might be talking about them cold. We have to touch on that as well. But I want to separate that we're talking about fats and oils that we are cooking with, not necessarily those fats and oils to do with our health, our brain health, our cellular function. So we can talk about that at a later date, but I want to keep it really strictly to cooking today, because otherwise we'll go down so many rabbit holes, we'll never get it all finished.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and I'm sure we could probably do a few episodes, not even just 2, about oils and fats. So can we cut to the chase and sort of talk about the fundamentals of what oils and fats are? Where do they sit? What are they? How does it all work? It's more than just the stuff that you cut off your steak.
Yes. Okay. So every time I've reviewed this subject or presented on this subject, I warn people that, look, we have to do just a tiny little bit of basic chemistry first. And if we can get that knocked over and out of the way, it'll just help us to understand what we're going to talk about in just a couple of moments. So for me, I think let's cover where do fats come from. So fats, from a chemical point of view, so this is how they are created, how they are constructed. They are either called saturated fat, and we'll all be familiar with that term because that generally comes from animals and humans, and also, bizarrely, comes from coconut. Now, I know that's all a bit confusing for everyone, but and coconuts don't have eyebrows and that kind of thing, but the fat in a coconut is mainly saturated. So we have saturated fats, and we also have unsaturated fats. And the unsaturated fats generally come from vegetables or plant-based materials. So there are 2 different types of fat, and this is important and it will make sense later. So if we're talking that the saturated fats are fairly simple, you can heat them to a relatively high temperature. They won't get damaged in any way, because the point here is watching out for damaging your fats when you heat them. So when you're cooking foods, how high is your temperature? And that's the point to really have a look at. So saturated fats generally are stable under heat, under kind of pressure or processing. This makes them very reliable, and it makes them very predictable in your cooking and in food manufacturing, etc., etc. Now, unsaturated fats, and this is often where the problems come, unsaturated fats come in a different variety of unsaturation. So this is where just a little bit deeper, bear with me. So you've either got a whole bunch of chemical bonds. Just think about it like little Pac-Men all holding hands all in a line. You know those little blue Pac-Men that you used to have in the old kind of computer games? Well, if they were all standing in a line holding hands, on an unsaturated fat, there's going to be one or several of these little hands that are going to have a very weak link or a bond. And when you heat that fat or oil to a particular temperature, and each one is slightly different, those bonds break apart, and the heating itself creates a chemical reaction. and the bonds reform after they've been broken apart, and they can often reform in a way that is now quite toxic to the human body. And this is why we often call fats, you'll have heard this term before, trans fatty acids. You've heard that, I'm sure.
I have. I've also heard of the term damaged fats.
Damaged fats, yes, similar idea. So these things happen under heat and pressure. So you can buy a product off the shelf that has already been damaged because it has been processed to the point that the fat is hydrogenated. And I always say to people, think peanut butter. Generally, unless it's a really good quality health food store kind of peanut butter, it will be hydrogenated. So things like Sanitarium is a hydrogenated peanut butter, and the hydrogenation process makes this fat now not so great for us. The next one is homogenization, and a good example there is milk.
I remember it well back in the 60s or 70s when we suddenly had no more cream floating on top of our milk.
Yeah, exactly. And so what did they do with all that cream? They didn't just remove it, although they did for skim milk, but with normal milk they didn't remove it. What they did, they put the milk through an intense process of homogenization, which means that it broke down the fat and scattered that fat, that beautiful cream, all the way through the milk. And now it is in such tiny, tiny particles, it actually can be damaging to our arteries. So homogenized milk is not a good idea for us, and homogenized anything is not a good idea. So they're just two examples of processes that can make a really good quality fat at its start, at its origin, a good quality fat, turn it into actually quite a toxic fat for the human body. And the third one we've already mentioned, the trans fatty acids, and of course the most famous example of that is margarine. Margarines have trans fatty acids in them. Deep fried foods, chips, it's a bit tragic. If you batter fish, so the old-fashioned fish and chips, very, very high in trans fatty acids. None of these things are good for us.
Is that because they've used just any old fat in cooking them?
Generally, it's because they've used any old fat. Because remember, if they were using saturated fats don't do this. They don't become damaged.
They don't become damaged at all, or far less?
Oh, far less. You would have to really be going some to damage a saturated fat, and it's not something you would be able to do in your kitchen. And even in the fast food store, they'd be hard pressed to do that. Food manufacturers can, of course, because they can submit food to incredible pressure and temperature. But even in your little store down the road that's selling you pizza or fish and chips or whatever, wherever you're getting your fast food from, even they won't be able to induce that kind of pressure or temperature. So as long as they're using saturated fat, that's fine. Okay,
well, how bad are these trans fats, hydrogenated oils, and all this sort of nasty stuff? What do they do to us?
Well, where do we start with there? Think back to episode 1, where we talked about inflammation. Do you remember that? So
it was the big one. It was the one that started it all.
It started it all off, and it really has still been the connection all the way through. So these toxic fats and oils in the body will create inflammation. They create free radicals. It's a little chemical compound that we call a free radical. And those free radicals are incredibly damaging to all of our tissues, whether it's our arteries and our veins and capillaries, or whether it's our respiratory system, or just our kidney tissue. Whatever it is, they create damage. And they create inflammation and then a breakdown of your cellular structure. So they're bad news all the way around, and you really don't want them in the body. Having said that, the body itself creates free radicals constantly. So our body is well designed to cope with a certain amount of free radical damage, and that's why we have things like antioxidants and anti-inflammatories that we create naturally in the body, and also, hopefully, that we eat in our diet. Do you remember those green vegetables we used to talk about?
Mm-hmm.
Well, most of those have an anti-inflammatory action, so they will be helping to disarm those free radicals.
So if you get a few of these nasty oils and fats in your system, it's not a fait accompli. There is a chance of remediating the situation through a good diet.
Oh, well, yes, there is, but at the same time, it's almost like going, well, gosh, how much fire are you going to put on that? It seems a bit crazy to sort of put too much in. and then
so
tried to
avoid
measure
it as much as possible,
Yeah.
but a little bit that sneaks in can be dealt with.
Absolutely. It all
Right.
becomes about balance, and it all becomes about quantity, and we've discussed this before. It's about the inflammation. How much inflammation do you allow in the body? Everything will inflame the body, so you're being inflamed constantly, but it's what do you do to reduce your exposure, and also what do you do to reduce the inflammation that's already there? So the same with the toxic fats and oils. I mean, I can't imagine we're never going to eat a bag of crisps again.
Probably not.
Right.
No.
Okay. So
It's
there you
my
have
inclination.
it. I'm thinking so too, however much I'd like to say that no, we're not going to do that again. And so there we have toxic oils. Most of those crisps have been deep fried in sunflower oil, and because sunflower oil is a polyunsaturated oil, it's already damaged in its makeup, and by heating it to make a crisp, it's shockingly damaged. So those oils in those kind of junk foods are shocking for us. But we just have to remember that, so that we're actually doing something to offset it as well in our diet.
Okay, so this episode's about cooking with oil.
Yeah.
So what sort of oils and fats should we be using that survive, that we can get away with? If the old model basically promoted vegetable oils, stay away from the other stuff.
Actually, I don't think so. I have to
Correct me?
disagree there. That I think the old model was very much the old model, which was probably the most correct model, was let's use natural foods and let's use saturated fats because they are the most stable under heat, pressure, etc., and the most reliable. Now, this looks like this is the kind of stuff that your mum, your grandma, your great-grandma would have had in her kitchen cabinet.
So that's the very old model.
The old model, yeah. Ghee, butter. I know my mum and my grandma used to cook with dripping, lard. So if we ever cooked meat, they would preserve the fat that came out of the meat. That the meat was, sitting in the baking tray, and there was that little bit of oil at the bottom the fat that had come out, and it was a liquid fat. She'd pour that off and put that in a pot. And we kept it in the fridge, or in England, sometimes, not always, especially not in the winter, you didn't really need to. So it'd be sitting on the back of the cabinet, and any time then she was doing any kind of shallow frying or cooking, she would use a little bit of that from that pot to cook with.
Well, in the recent old, which was my teenage years, we were told to steer clear of that stuff and to go with vegetable oils and margarine.
Yeah, that's
vegetable fat.
Yeah, that's where all the bad news started, wasn't it, really? And I think we're pretty much, we've decided these days, and we've got enough research to have a little look and see how that actually it was a very poor message, not well constructed, and certainly not based on good, reliable research. So I'm hoping, and this is another reason for doing this podcast, because I get so many questions about oils that it shows me people are still mighty confused around this subject. And so I just, again, really implore people to consider this and go back to the basics, go back to using real food. And when you consider for a moment, just let's take the example of something really innocuous like sunflower oil, because we can all imagine that. Just think about a sunflower seed and how much processing it takes to extract the oil from a sunflower seed. It's really not the most natural of processes. You couldn't do it in your kitchen. You couldn't do it on your kitchen bench. It would take you an awful lot of pounding and bashing to get any oil out of that seed. You could crush the seed up, sure, but to get oil out of it? Not really. So for me, I go, it really is a very unnatural process to actually be extracting the oil. It's not even like gorgeous olive oil, which, yeah, you just crush it enough and the oil will pour out of the olive. And that to me seems a more real kind of process. And it makes it a more real food, rather than using these vegetable or seed oils that have been heavily processed to actually make them into what you see them on the shelf.
So in order to get oil out of something like rapeseed, which is commonly known as canola, you have to do a lot of heavy processing.
Heavy processing, sometimes, in some cases, lots of chemical solvents. And this can then be a problem, because not only are you using an unnatural and fragile and unreliable oil, which will become a free radical at any given moment as soon as you heat it, but you've also potentially got the residue of chemical solvents or whatever it is that they've used to extract the oil left in your product. So all round, it really is not a good look.
Okay, so you're suggesting that we cook with saturated fats, things like ghee, butter. If you don't know what ghee is, people, that's basically the fat out of butter, which has had all the other
proteins and things. It's a
removed.
clarified butter.
Yes, that's right. That's the word, isn't it? Clarified. Fat from any form of animal, whether it be tallow or dripping or lard, and but any vegetable.
Oh, well, I would use coconut. The only thing I would suggest about coconut is that you don't deep fry with it. But coconut has enough saturated bonds in it to mean that it is not easily broken down into that free radical.
So you can do some pretty hot cooking with coconut?
Yeah, in your home. Yeah, sure.
Just don't go hardcore.
No,
Okay.
that's right. One of the other, just to add, we've talked about saturated fats and unsaturated fats that look like the polyunsaturates. So they're the seed and the plant-based. But there's another unsaturate, and that's a monounsaturated. And that means that there's one bond, not a whole multitude of them, but one. So it means that these oils are not as unstable as some of the seed oils, like your sunflower, safflower, canola, but they're still, you need to be wary of them. So they're things like olive oil, coconut, avocado, macadamia. Now they can all be used very comfortably at a medium heat, but the trick is not to really overheat them. And one of the ways people always say, well, how do I know? How do I know what the temperature is? And I say, okay, so a neat trick, and this I got from working with chefs over the years, is don't allow the oil in your pan to smoke. So once it's reached its individual smoke point, that's showing you that oil is breaking down. And so it's no longer, I don't think, safe to use because it's now turning into a damaged fat. So you want to turn that heat down on the pan. I think a mistake that we commonly make is that we overheat our food and we cook with far too high a temperature. It's totally unnecessary. So practice turning the heat down. You don't need to get it as high as it is. Maybe we need to cook for a little bit longer at a lesser temperature so that we keep those, particularly if you're not going to use the saturated fats, to keep things safe. So you can use something like avocado oil to a particular temperature until it smokes. And the same with coconut and olive. I mean, there's a lot of controversy, I think, around olive oil. And you can use it to at least 180 degrees. Above that, it becomes very contentious as to whether that's good or not. So again, don't let it smoke and just turn the pan down. Turn it down.
Okay, so we've got three basic groupings here by the looks of it. We've got the oils that we can heat to really high temperatures if necessary. We've got the oils that we can heat somewhat and get away with it. Are there oils, like the ones that you said that we shouldn't go near, safflower, sunflower, canola and the like, we can't heat those at all, you're saying, but are they still okay to eat?
Look, I don't think so particularly. I mean, there are some that just shouldn't be.
Even cold?
I don't think they should be on the shelves. I mean, canola oil, cottonseed oil, Crisco, for heaven's sake. I don't think these things should be available for human consumption.
Okay, so they're no good for heating, and we should be reaching back towards olive oil and avocado and stuff like that for even cold salad type ingredients, even though we're not talking about that today.
That's right, because in the processing of these oils, to have got these oils onto the supermarket shelves, they have been damaged.
Right.
So
and
we
this
haven't
is what
even
you're
got
saying.
them to our kitchen yet.
Yeah, this is what you were saying earlier about the seed oils are really difficult to process. Well, but there are some seed oils, things like hemp seed oil.
Yeah.
There are some seed oils out there, aren't there,
yeah.
that are supposed to be okay.
Oh, look, and are actually very good for our health, as long as they have been processed so that they've been crushed in a very and extracted without chemical solvents, in a cold pressing. And these oils you'll generally find in the health food store or on one of those stalls in the market where people are very enthusiastic about selling them to you. And they're incredibly expensive. So things like your hemp seed, pumpkin seed, flaxseed oils, they're very good for us. They are high in omega-3 fatty acids, which is great for our brain. And we're talking about that on another podcast, not this one. But they're actually great for our health, but we must never, ever heat those. You just use those in your smoothies and make a salad dressing out of them and pour them over your salad or over your veggies cold. Those are, again, there are other examples of seed oils that, as long as they've been extracted properly and not cheaply, if you find these oils cheaply, they're damaged. There's
Okay.
no two ways about it. It's very expensive to extract them safely because they have to be, think about it, they have to be processed without any oxygen, without any light. I mean, it's just amazing. The equipment that you need to actually extract these oils and keep them beneficial is an expensive process.
And heat helps to get oil moving, so
Yeah.
they've got to not use any heat
Yeah,
and all.
that's right.
So all precious.
Yeah.
Okay, so what you were just talking about then is the holy grail back 30 years, 40 years ago of polyunsaturated oils, which everybody swore by, which they turned into that Wunderkinder, as they say, of margarine, which we were all encouraged to consume instead of that toxic butter.
Yes.
What was going on there, Caroline? Why shouldn't we be eating margarine?
It was created. I mean, you're opening a Pandora's box here. So you've created a food product that used up a whole load of waste from agriculture that wouldn't otherwise be used. So what better way to use up your waste and be paid for it as a farmer than turn it into a different product? And because at the same time it coincided as well with the whole push for low fat, no fat, because the science at that time was pointing to a connection between high saturated fat and heart disease, which has been since shown to be incorrect and unstable research, or should I say unreliable research. It came out at that point in time. So it was almost like an answer to that medical push for low fat, no fat. So the food industry was purely, creating an alternative for us because that's what we were looking for at the time. And that's kind of where it's come from, really. It was a big mistake right from the very start. But from a financial point of view, if you were one of the growers or one of the food manufacturers, it was an absolute boom. Fantastic. So it depends which perspective you're looking at it from, I suppose.
Okay, so you swing around to Aunt Mavis's place and she pulls out a tub of margarine. You just steer clear?
Oh, I do, personally. Yeah, it's a horrible, nasty, damaged fat, and I don't want that in my body.
So, and what about the butter blends? Some of the butter blends that are out there nowadays?
Yeah, well, it's a shame. I mean, they've been marginalised. And
marginalised, that's cute.
I think you need to steer clear of those. We want butter. And yeah, the annoying, inconvenient part of it is it's hard. And that's the point. It's saturated. So just take a little bit off the block and leave it out of the fridge or something. Or just get over it, put it on a hot toast so that it melts quickly. But seriously, yeah, we need to use the real thing rather than a make-believe.
Again, it goes back to fundamentals. How does butter come out of the cream? It comes out as a lump of something hard.
Yeah, it's a solid, that's right.
Yeah, adapt it from that and you're changing things.
Yeah.
Step away from processing people.
Yes.
So we've done a quick overview there of fats and oils, basically three types. What we want to get stuck into is probably the saturated fats for cooking, and if we only want to use moderate heat or no heat at all, we stick with the monounsaturates, the olive oils and the ilk. What else is there to say about this topic?
Well, I think, and this is, again, sometimes this isn't as popular as I wish it was. Even if you're going to stay with using some of your polyunsaturated oils, which I don't agree is a good idea, but if people were to do that because they feel more comfortable, and there's always a flavour thing in cooking, people really insist on this idea. Things have got to taste nice.
Well, something like sesame seed oil. It's got a particular flavour. It's really powerful flavour enhancer in Asian cooking.
Yeah, I get that. And so therefore, if you're going to really hang on to your oils and use them in a restricted way, please at least buy them organic. Because if they're organic, then at least they haven't been grown with a whole bunch of pesticides, which sadly aren't killed off in any of the processing. And so in a way, you're just mitigating the worst of things. So if you're going to do that, buy an organic sesame oil, buy an organic sunflower oil. Someone said to me the other day they will always use grapeseed oil because they like the fact it's so bland. And I pointed out to them that grapeseed oil is created from all of the rubbish, really, that comes from the wine industry. So and we know that they use a huge amount of pesticides on the vines. Not all of them, but the majority of them do. And the grapeseed oil, which is cheap as chips, is definitely going to have had all of this pesticide sprayed on it. So if you're going to do that, then at least make that commitment to getting it organically grown, so that you're reducing that exposure. That's what I would be suggesting.
So this episode's been primarily about cooking, which has been the challenging part of dealing with fats and oils. But a lot of people actually try to avoid fat in their diet completely. What are we going to be talking about next?
Well, what I'd love to talk about next is how we need to have fats in our diet. They're an essential part of our diet. They are actually an essential part of our body. They make up an integral part of our cellular structure. And without them, our cell integrity would very quickly be challenged and damaged. In fact, without enough fat, your brain can't create any kind of sensible, optimistic, upbeat thinking. So we are so dependent upon fat, but obviously upon the right fats, not upon the inflammatory fats for even for our neurology. It's really fascinating. So I'd love to talk about that next and cover the kind of fats and oils that the body wants and needs and is made of. So if your body is made of oil and fat, you've got to eat it because we become our food. So if our brain, I think I saw some stats, the dry weight is like 70% fat. So if you're not putting fat into your diet, how are you creating and turning over your brain cells? And the answer there is you're not. And I'm sure that this is also part of the plethora of dementia and Alzheimer's, is that we just do not have the diet right yet. And as well as brain problems being an inflammatory problem, it's because we don't have enough. Would you believe the good fats are anti-inflammatory? So where you've got some fats and the damaged ones are inflammatory causing, particularly in the brain, conversely, the good fats for us are anti-inflammatory. So we must have these in our diet to actually be able to form part of our brain and part of our neurons and part of our cellular structure. It's and I find the people I struggle with the most to get this point across to are people that have decided to follow a vegan style diet. They're the ones who really struggle to get the essential fats into their diet adequately, without them eating, a heap of nuts every single day and getting bored. So let's cover that next time, because I think that's something that is really important.
Okay, so that's for next time, Ripper. So in the meantime, everyone, there are some emails and comments you can send our way. Email, which is always good, can be sent to contact@carolinenutrition.com. Caroline's Twitter handle is @CJRScott, whereas mine is @IanCath, and Cath is spelt with a K. Love to hear from you. Love to know what your thoughts are. Okay, Caroline, so before we split this joint, what's the recipe for this week?
Yeah, okay, so the recipe, and especially since I felt, we're heading into summer, at least we are if you're down here in Australia with all of us. So I thought what would be really lovely would be to use one of my favourite nuts, which contains some really valuable oils for our brains, and that's walnuts. Now, if anyone groans and goes, oh God, I can't stand walnuts, then use pecans instead. But making a beautiful summer salad out of walnuts and beetroots, as well as using, and again, it's your option of using either lentils or quinoa, whichever grabs your fancy. And we'll have the recipe all written out for you, but basically just grab some beetroots and some quinoa and some walnuts and some Spanish onion, and get a really generous handful of good old chopped up fresh parsley and mint. And then, of course, your usual dressing of lemon juice and virgin olive oil and some salt and pepper. And basically, you're going to cook up the beets and the lentils or the quinoa. And you can either serve this warm. It's one of my favourite salads, actually, is warmed beetroot salad. And you can even cheat a little bit and put some beautiful soft goat cheese over the top. Or if you're not interested in warm beetroot, you don't like your roots hot, then you might just want to serve it cold, and that's fine too. But be really generous with the nuts, because obviously that's the part of the they're the good oils, and your virgin olive oil. Be generous with that. If you're not really into olive oil, and I have met people that aren't, strange but true, then you could change it for hemp seed oil. Or flaxseed oil, being aware that that's got more of a flavour. A hemp seed oil is fairly bland.
And I'd also suggest that if you don't like your olive oil, try some different olive oils, because they're not all created equal.
No.
Some olive oils have got quite a bitter flavour, and some are hot on the palate. So it's a bit like wine. Some olive oil maybe doesn't suit you, but other oils will undoubtedly suit you if you just go tasting a few different varieties.
Yeah, and don't also... please, organic olive oil. There is so much controversy around olive oil. If you're buying an imported olive oil at this point in time, there's been a lot of controversy about the olive oils coming from Italy, Greece, Spain that have been cut with cheaper oils. So organic, if you're buying it from outside of Australia and from inside Australia. We've got a fabulous industry here in Australia. Why don't we support that? So organic olive oil, you can even get that in your supermarket.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Caroline. Let's get ready and get the next episode all about fats and oils in our brains ready for next week.
Yeah, I can't wait for that, because it's going to be a doozy for some people.
Okay, thanks. See you next time.
Yep.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.